Arizona has the highest rate of unexplained disappearances per square mile of any state in the continental U.S. 7 people sent us their stories. We changed their names. We altered identifying details. But every single thing that happened to them happened. No fiction. No embellishment. Just real people, real Arizona, real terror they're still living with. I'm your host on Black Fears. Before we start, drop your location and what time it is where you are right now. Let's begin. I want to be upfront about something before I tell you this. I don't scare easy. 2 deployments overseas. 6 years of solo trail running through the Sonoran Desert in heat that would hospitalize most people. My whole life I've been the guy who looks for the rational explanation first, second, third. The guy who rolls his eyes at ghost stories. The guy who, when something strange happens, immediately starts building the most boring possible reason for it. So understand what it means when I tell you I drove home from that trail with shaking hands. For the first time since 2011. It was early April, a Saturday. I left Wickenburg heading south on US 89 just after 6 a.m. There's a stretch out there where you turn east off the highway onto a dirt access road and run until the sound of traffic disappears completely, until the only things left are your breathing, your footsteps, and the creak of the saguaro in the morning air. No cell signal. No other people. Nothing. That's why I go. That's the whole point. The light that morning was perfect. That low golden Arizona light where everything looks lit from inside. Temperature around 65 degrees, creosote smell still hanging in the air from rain 2 days before. If you've never smelled creosote after desert rain, I don't know how to describe it except to say it smells like the earth finally letting go of something. I was 3 miles in, completely in my head, feeling good. One of those runs where everything clicks and you forget you have a body. That's when I noticed it. About 200 meters off the trail to my right. A saguaro that didn't fit. Now, I know how that sounds. Cactus that didn't fit. But here's the thing about running the same trail for 6 years. You build an unconscious map of it. You don't decide to memorize the landscape. It just happens, the way you know every crack in your own driveway without ever studying it. And this one was wrong. Not monstrous, not obviously strange. Just wrong. Its arms sat too close to its body. Too symmetrical. Most saguaros have this random, almost human quality to their arms, one higher, one lower, one bent at the elbow. This one's arms were pressed in tight, like a person standing at full attention. I noted it and kept running. Told myself it was just an unusual specimen. Half a mile later I looked right again. It was still there, roughly parallel to me. If anything, slightly closer, maybe 175 meters now. Same posture. Arms tight, symmetrical, body upright. 2 cars going the same speed on the highway, I told myself. Just coincidence of sight lines making it look like the same cactus. I pushed the pace a little and didn't look again until I hit the 6-mile turnaround. Then I started back. And it was on my left. Same shape. Same tight arms. About 150 meters out, on the completely opposite side of the trail from where I'd been seeing it on the way out. I stopped, stood there in the middle of the dirt trail with my hands on my knees like I just finished a hard interval. I looked at it for probably a full minute. It didn't move. It was still. It was just a cactus in the morning light. Nothing moving. No wind. Completely still. I laughed out loud at myself. Actually laughed. Alone in the desert at 7 a.m. and started running again. If you're still watching, I need you to understand what happened next, because this is the part I've never been able to reason my way out of. I was maybe a mile from my truck. Running well, breathing settled, telling myself the story I'd been building all morning. Different cactus, weird light, tired eyes, overactive brain. The whole thing was already becoming an anecdote I'd tell my wife at breakfast. Almost funny. Then I heard a sound. Not footsteps. Not an animal. I've heard coyotes, javelinas, the scatter of quail. This wasn't any of that. It was a single sound, off to my left, like something very large shifting its weight from one position to another. A heavy displacement of earth and brush. Quick, deliberate, like whatever made it had decided to move and moved. I stopped. I turned left. About 100 meters out, Closer than it had ever been was the shape. And one arm was raised. I am telling you that one arm was now raised higher than before. Raised like a hand being lifted. No wind. No movement in any other vegetation anywhere around me. The air was completely dead still. The arm was raised. My body made the decision before my brain did. I was running full speed before I even processed what I was doing. Not trail pace, not workout pace, but the kind of running that comes from somewhere older than thought. I ran the last quarter mile to my truck and I did not look back once. Not because I was being smart about it, but because I genuinely could not make myself turn around. Something in me knew that turning around was the wrong thing to do, the way you know not to open a certain door. I got to my truck. I locked the doors. I sat there for 20 minutes in the cab before I could start the engine, and my hands. Steady under fire, steady through 2 deployments, steady through 11 years of things that should have broken them, were shaking. Now here's what I've never told anyone except my wife. I went back once. About 3 weeks later, broad daylight, with 2 people I trust. We ran the full out and back, all 12 miles, and nothing happened. Normal morning. Beautiful desert. The trail was exactly what it always is. And when we got back to the trucks, I walked out into the scrubland on the right side of the trail around the 3.5-mile mark, where I'd first noticed it, and I looked for it. I walked a grid out there for 30 minutes while my friends thought I was losing my mind. There was no cactus with arms pressed in tight and symmetrical anywhere near where I'd seen it. There was no cactus at all in one section of ground, maybe 40 feet across, where the soil looked different. Harder packed. Like something had been standing there long enough that nothing grew underneath. I still run that trail. I still love it. But I stay on the route, I don't look out into the scrubland. And I never run it alone. I've thought about what I saw probably 300 times since April. I've built every rational case I can think of: heat confusion, though it was 65 degrees. Low blood sugar, though I'd eaten well that morning. Some kind of visual tracking error in a tired brain, though I'd slept 8 hours. Each time I run the logic, it holds up for a while, and then I hit the same wall. That sound. One heavy, deliberate shift of weight. And then the arm raised. You don't explain that away. You just carry it. Arizona is not like other places. I've run trails in Colorado, in New Mexico, in Utah, and they're all beautiful and all have their own strangeness. But the Sonoran Desert has something underneath it that I don't think we have words for. Something old. Something that was doing whatever it does long before the highway was paved and the town was named and any of us showed up with our maps and our headlamps and our confidence that we understood what we were walking into. Whatever was in that desert that morning, whatever has been in that desert, maybe always, it let me leave. I think about that a lot too. I don't know if I was being watched or warned or tested, or if I just brushed up against something that didn't care about me at all, and the fact that I'm here to talk about it is just luck. I don't know which of those possibilities I'd prefer. What I know is this: the Sonoran Desert has been out there for 20 million years. We've been running trails through it for maybe 50. Whatever learned to survive in it before us learned things we haven't. That morning something showed me one of those things. And then it let me go. I almost didn't stop in Wendon. My temperature gauge had been climbing for about 10 miles and I kept telling myself it would settle. The way you tell yourself things on a long drive when you don't want them to be true. But somewhere between Salome and Wendon on US 60, the needle touched the red and I pulled off. Small parking lot. One gas station. A hardware store 2 streets over with a hand-painted sign. A motel that looked like it hadn't changed since 1974. Population somewhere under 700, if the county records were being generous. I was 5 weeks into a 13-week travel nursing contract in Wickenburg. Columbus, Ohio to the Arizona desert, new state, new scenery, new version of myself after a few years that had been harder than I'd like to admit. I'd been driving back from a day trip to Phoenix, taking the long way back on US 60 because I wasn't ready to be inside 4 walls yet. That drive had been mine. That afternoon had been mine. And then the needle touched red and Wendon became part of my story. The gas station attendant was a man in his mid-60s. Friendly in that unhurried way of people who have lived a long time in a very small place and made their peace with it. He looked under the hood, diagnosed the problem in about 40 seconds, and told me the specific coolant I needed. He'd sold his last bottle of that same morning, but the hardware store 2 streets over might have it. He called ahead while I stood there. His name was on a patch above his shirt pocket, and I remember it started with a G, but I won't use it here. He just seemed like a good man doing a good thing on a hot afternoon. I walked to the hardware store. June in the desert. 107 degrees. The heat coming off the pavement in visible waves. The sky, that particular white blue that Arizona gets in deep summer when the sun has been at full strength for 6 straight hours. The hardware store was cool inside. Dim. Smelled like motor oil and old wood. The man behind the counter, younger, early 30s, also friendly, had the coolant waiting. While he was ringing me up, he asked how long I was staying in the area. Just passing through, I told him. Car trouble. He nodded like this was a reasonable thing to say, and then, very casually, as I was putting my card back in my wallet, he said, "Good time to get it sorted. You don't want to be on the road at night out here. Especially not east of town." I looked at him. "Why east?" He smiled. Not a strange smile. A normal, mild, helpful smile. Hot nights, people get tired, make mistakes. Just a long stretch of nothing out that way. Completely reasonable. I said thanks and walked back to the gas station. I didn't think about it for another 4 hours. The coolant went in, I ran the engine, everything looked stable. But by then the day had shifted and the drive back felt less appealing, and the motel was right there, and the rate was $42, and I thought, why not? One night. Sleep somewhere new. Leave early. The woman who ran the motel was in her 70s, sharp eyes, silver hair pulled back. The kind of person who has strong opinions about thread count and isn't shy about sharing them. She showed me the guest book, leather-bound, dated from 1987, signatures from every state and a few countries. She was genuinely proud of it, and I genuinely liked her for that. I signed it. Room 6. End of the row. The room was clean. Old but clean. A ceiling fan that worked, curtains that actually blocked the light, a bed that had probably seen 30 years of travelers and still held up. I took a shower, ate crackers from my bag, lay on top of the covers in the air conditioning, picked up the Gideon Bible from the nightstand the way you do when you're bored and there's no cell signal and the television only gets 3 channels. A piece of folded notebook paper fell out onto my lap. I almost put it straight back in without opening it. Almost. It was a hand-drawn map. Pencil on a torn page, the edges rough, the lines simple but clearly intentional. Someone who knew what they were drawing. I could recognize US 60 running east to west across the top. The streets of what I assumed was Wendon below it. And then south of everything, a feature I recognized from the drive-in. A dry wash, a sandy riverbed that ran parallel to the highway at a distance, flanked by low scrub and pale rock. Along that wash, in a rough east-to-west line, 7 small X marks, evenly spaced, like someone had measured. Next to each X, a date. Handwritten small but legible. I read all 7 dates. The earliest was 9 years ago. The most recent was June of the previous year, 11 months before the night I was sitting in that room. All 7 dates were in June. I sat with that paper in my hands for a long time. Then I got up and walked to the office and knocked on the door. The woman opened it in a bathrobe, reading glasses on, paperback in hand. She looked at me the way you look at someone when you're already composing the polite version of go back to your room. I showed her the map without saying anything. What happened to her face is hard to describe precisely. It didn't collapse. It didn't go white. It was more like a door closing, a controlled, practiced closing, the kind that takes a long time to learn. Something behind her eyes went away, and what was left was neutral and still. She said, "Where did you find this?" I told her the nightstand Bible. She reached out and took the paper from my hand. Not grabbed, just took it the way you take something that belongs to you. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "Some guests leave things behind. Doesn't mean anything." And then, before I could say a word, "You should get some sleep. Early start tomorrow." She closed the door. I stood in the parking lot in the June heat at 9 o'clock at night, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The very specific feeling of being somewhere you are not supposed to be, and everyone around you knowing it and no one saying it out loud. I went back to my room. I lay in the dark. I ran the tape. The gas station man stopping mid-sentence when I mentioned the wash. His face going careful. The subject change, smooth and immediate. The hardware store man's unprompted advice about east of town. At night, Not because of crime, not because of road conditions, but delivered with the timing of someone who says it automatically. The motel owner's face closing like a door. 7x marks. All in June. It was June. Here's what I want to ask you, because I've thought about this for almost a year and I still don't have an answer. What is the version of the story where it's nothing? I've tried to build it. A local eccentric who made maps. Old local legend someone was documenting. Kids playing a game along the wash that someone took too seriously. I can build those stories. I just can't make them feel true. Because of the dates. Not scattered across the year all June. 7 events or 7 locations or 7 somethings all in the same month. And the most recent one 11 months before I arrived, which means whatever the cycle was, it was still running. I left at 5:30 in the morning. Didn't stop for coffee. Didn't check out properly. Just left the key on the nightstand and drove east on US 60 as the sky went from black to purple to that impossible Arizona pink. I didn't look at the wash as I passed it. I kept my eyes on the road. I've searched Wendon online more times than I'd like to admit. There's almost nothing. A few county records. A mention in a regional travel blog from 2019 that calls it a blink and miss it desert stop. No news stories I could find. No local forum threads. No record of anything along that wash that I could access. 700 people in that town. The gas station man, the hardware store man, the motel owner. All of them friendly, all of them helpful, all of them steering me, in their own way, in the same direction. Away from the same place. Whatever is along that wash in June, Wendon knows about it. Has known about it for at least 9 years, probably longer. Long enough that they've gotten good at the redirect. Long enough that it doesn't read as evasion anymore. It reads as hospitality. Come in. Get your coolant, here's a cold Coke. Get some sleep. Early start tomorrow, don't go near the wash. I don't know what the X marks mean. I don't know if they're locations of something found or something left, or something that happens there on its own. I don't know if the map was a warning or a record or something else entirely. What I know is that someone hid it inside a Bible in a motel room in a town of 700 people, and that every single person I spoke to in that town had already decided I shouldn't know where the wash was. They were probably right. I'm still glad I found it. I don't tell this story easily. Not because I'm afraid of how it sounds. I'm 52 years old and I stopped caring about that a long time ago. I tell it carefully because it belongs to a place that deserves to be spoken about with care. I grew up on this land. I taught children on this land for 22 years. I know what lives here and I know what it means when something shows itself. So when I tell you what happened on the ridge east of my property last March, I need you to understand. This is not a campfire story. This is not something I'm sharing for entertainment. I'm sharing it because the elder I spoke to afterward told me some things are meant to be passed forward. Not as warning exactly, more as acknowledgement, as proof that the land is still alive in ways most people have forgotten to account for. I retired from teaching 4 years ago, came back to the land after my wife passed. We had built our life out here between Tuba City and Kayenta on US 160, Red Mesa country, the kind of landscape that takes your breath the first time you see it and never quite gives it all back. I wanted to be close to what we had made together. The house sits on a flat piece of ground with the mesa rising to the east and open country stretching west. At night, no light pollution. Stars so dense they look like something spilled. I have 2 dogs. Brothers from the same litter. Shepherd mixes, 8 years old now. I call them by Dine names that translate roughly to iron and yellow. I've had dogs my whole life and these 2 are the steadiest animals I've ever known. Not aggressive, not anxious. They've slept through thunderstorms that rattled the windows. They've watched coyotes pace the fence line without doing more than lifting their heads. In 8 years, I have never seen either of them afraid. I need you to hold that, because everything that follows depends on you understanding what it meant when they were. It was mid-March. Night's still cold up here. We sit at high elevation and March doesn't care what the calendar says. It will still drop into the 20s and remind you who's in charge. I'd gone to bed around 9. Dogs inside with me the way they always are in cold weather, one on the floor at the foot of the bed and one on the rug near the door. Normal night. Wind had been up earlier but died down around 8. By the time I turned the light out, it was completely still. I woke up at some point in the deep middle of the night. No alarm. No sound that I could identify. Just awake. Suddenly, the way you sometimes are when something has shifted in the air around you without making a noise you can name. I lay there in the dark for a moment and then I saw it. Orange light coming under the gap at the bottom of the bedroom curtains. Moving light. Firelight. My first thought was brush fire. We're careful about fire out here the way coastal people are careful about water. It is the thing that can take everything. I got up and went to the window and pulled the curtain back. There was a fire on the ridge, about 400 yards up the slope to the east. A large fire, not a campfire, not a small thing, but a real sustained burn. Big enough to light the rock face of the ridge orange and throw moving shadows down the slope toward the flat ground. I stood there trying to assess it. Was it spreading? Which direction was the wind? How fast? Running through the calculation automatically the way you do when you've lived somewhere long enough that emergency response becomes instinct. That's when I noticed Iron. He was at the bedroom door and he was pressed against it. Not sitting, not lying down, pressed. Flat against the wood like he was trying to push through it or disappear into it. Ears back. Every muscle in his body locked rigid. And he was staring at the window. Not at me. Not at the door. At the window I was standing at. I looked at Yellow. He had pressed himself into the far corner of the room. Down against the floor, body flat, chin almost touching the ground. Same locked posture. Same stare. At the window. 8 years. I have never seen that from either of them. Not once. I want to stop here for a second because I know what some of you are thinking. Dogs react to fire, it's instinct, they smell smoke and they get afraid. I thought that too. For about 30 seconds I thought that. And then I realized there was no smoke smell in the room. The window was closed. The fire was 400 yards up the slope. And these dogs had seen controlled burns on neighboring land before without doing anything more than sniffing the air with mild interest. This was not that. Whatever my dogs were responding to, it was not the fire. I watched the fire for a long time from the window. An hour, maybe more. It burned steadily. It didn't spread. It didn't move toward the house or laterally along the ridge. Just burned, contained, constant, in the same position on the rock face. I told myself it was probably a trash fire from someone on the neighboring property. Maybe kids, maybe somebody careless. I told myself the dogs were picking up on my own alertness and mirroring it back to me the way dogs sometimes do. I went back to bed somewhere after 2 in the morning. I didn't sleep easily, but I slept. In the morning, I took my coffee to the porch the way I always do and looked east at the ridge. There was nothing there. And here is where I need you to understand something about fire and what it leaves behind, because fire always leaves something. Always. Ash, scorched earth. The black smell that hangs in cold air for days. The particular way burned brush looks against rock. The gray-white residue on stone. Fire is not subtle in what it does to a landscape. I have seen burns out here from 20 years ago that the land still carries. The ridge was untouched. The rock face was the same pale red it always is. The pinyon and juniper on the slope were exactly as they'd been the morning before. The scrub brush, the dry grass at the base of the slope, nothing. Not a single scorched blade. Not a mark. I set my coffee down and I walked up there myself. All the way to the rock face, picking my way up the slope, looking at the ground as I went. The soil was dry and cold and completely undisturbed. The plants were alive and unburned. I pressed my hand against the rock face where the fire had been brightest, cold. Not residual warmth. Cold, the way rock is cold at 7 a.m. in March when the sun hasn't reached it yet. No ashes. No scorched earth. Nothing. I stood on that ridge for a long time and looked back down at my house. Tried to work out angles, tried to construct a version of the night before where a fire that large left no trace. I could not do it. There is no version. Fire leaves marks. This left none. I spoke to an elder I trust. A woman who has lived on this land longer than I have and knows it in ways that took her a lifetime to learn. I won't share her name. I told her everything, the fire, the location on the ridge, the duration, the absence of any trace in the morning. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she asked me one question. She asked whether I had seen anything between the house and the fire. On the flat ground. Before I turned back from the window, I had to think about it. And then I remembered something I had processed in the moment as nothing, as a shadow thrown by the fire's movement. A shape on the flat ground between the house and the base of the slope. I had seen it and my brain had filed it immediately under shadow and moved on. But now, thinking about it with her question sitting in the air between us, the fire was to the east. A shadow from a fire to the east falls west. Away from the ridge, toward the house. This shape had been between me and the fire, which meant it was in the wrong position to be a shadow from that source. And it had been facing the house. I told her this. She nodded slowly. She didn't tell me what it was. I didn't ask. I am dying. I grew up with the knowledge of what walks this land the way other people grow up with the knowledge of traffic laws. Not because someone sat you down and explained it formally, but because it is simply part of understanding where you live and what it requires of you. I know what moves at night on high ground. I know what fire means when fire leaves no ash. I knew before I walked up that ridge what I was not going to find. Some things you don't say by name. The elder knows this. I know this. What I will tell you is what I did the next morning. I put down offerings. I did the things that needed to be done, the things my grandmother taught me and her grandmother taught her, the practices that exist precisely because this land has always had things in it that notice when you're paying attention and notice when you're not. I did them carefully and I did them with respect. I haven't seen the fire again. Iron and yellow have not behaved that way again. But I'll tell you what has changed. I don't look at the ridge the same way I used to. I used to look at it the way you look at something beautiful, the color of the rock, the way the light hits it at different hours, the silhouette of it against a winter sky. I still see all of that. But now I also see it the way my dogs saw that window that night. With the understanding that something on the other side has already seen me. The land out here is not empty. It has never been empty. Some of us have just been here long enough to stop being surprised by that. The car behind me had been there for 90 miles before I admitted to myself that something was wrong. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not the car. Not what happened at the gas station. Not what my husband told me when I got home. The part one keep coming back to is 90 miles. 90 miles of telling myself the most comfortable story I could find, adjusting it every time it stopped working, rebuilding it, holding it together with both hands, because the alternative was admitting that something was actually happening and I was alone on I-10 at 2:30 in the morning with nowhere to go. I'm an ICU nurse. 11 years of nights. I know what it looks like when a person is in danger and I know what it looks like when a person's exhausted brain is manufacturing danger out of nothing. And the hardest part of that night was that I genuinely could not tell which one I was in. That's what I want you to understand before I tell you the rest. I wasn't naive. I wasn't paranoid. I was a trained professional running every diagnostic I had, and the answer kept coming back inconclusive, and the car kept coming back the same distance behind me, and the road kept going straight and flat and empty into the Arizona dark. It was mid-July. I just finished a double 48 hours with 2 naps that didn't count as sleep. The kind of tired that sits behind your eyes like pressure. Tucson to our house near Casa Grande, about 70 miles on I-10 westbound, a drive I done probably 200 times. I know that road the way I know a patient's chart after a long shift. Every detail familiar, nothing surprising. I left the hospital parking garage at 2:08 a.m. I remember the time because I'd been watching the clock for the last 4 hours of the shift the way you do when you're running on fumes and the only thing keeping you moving is the specific knowledge of when it ends. July in Arizona, even at 2 a.m. the temperature was still somewhere in the low 90s. I had the windows down for the sensation, Cold Air on max, an album I knew well enough to sing. Standard procedure. I've driven tired before. I know my limits. The first 30 miles were fine. Just the road and the dark and the occasional set of taillights far ahead and the smell of warm asphalt and desert scrub coming through the open windows. I was tired but functional. Thinking about the shower I was going to take. The specific pillow I was going to sleep on. Somewhere around the Picacho exit 219, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. High, bright LED lights, the kind that sit up in the frame the way newer trucks and SUVs mount them, filling the mirror with white. I registered them and moved on. One other person on I-10 westbound at 2:30 in the morning. Statistically unremarkable. I drove another 10 miles. Checked the mirror at exit 208. The lights were still there. Same position behind me. I estimated maybe 15 car lengths. I was doing 80, which is what everyone does on that stretch at that hour, and they were doing 80, which is what you'd expect. 2 cars going the same speed on an empty highway. That's all. Then I did something almost without deciding to. I pressed the accelerator and brought it up to 88. Watched the mirror. The lights came up to 88. 15 car lengths. Maintained. I eased back to 80. The lights eased back. 15 car lengths. Now here's what my brain did, and I want to be precise about this because it matters. It didn't alarm. It searched. It went looking for the explanation that required the least amount of emergency, the way a good clinician looks for the most common diagnosis before the rare one. Speed matching on an empty highway is something drivers do unconsciously. You find a pace car, you lock onto it, you stop thinking about your speed. I've done it myself. Most people have. Completely normal. Completely explainable. I pushed it to 88 again. Then 90. Watched. 90 miles per hour at 2:40 in the morning on I-10, and those lights held their distance like they were attached to me by a cable. I let off the gas entirely. Coasted down to 60. On the interstate. In the dark. 60 miles per hour, the kind of speed that feels almost absurd out there, the kind that makes the road feel longer than it is. The lights came down to 60. 15 car lengths. That cold thing happened in my chest. Not panic. I want to be clear, it wasn't panic. It was something quieter and more specific than panic. It was the feeling of a differential diagnosis resolving. Of the unlikely answer becoming the only answer left after everything else has been eliminated. Someone was following me. I passed exit 200. Casa Grande was still 15 miles out. I started running options. Get off the highway. But the exits between there and Casa Grande are dark and empty, off-ramps into nothing. Call my husband. No, I needed my hands and my eyes. The gas station at exit 194. I knew it, Valero, open late. Lights, a reason to stop that wasn't just stopping. I kept 60. The lights kept 60. I watched the mirror more than the road for the next 4 miles, which I'm not proud of. I took exit 194. The gas station was lit up the way gas stations are lit up at 3 a.m., that particular hard white light that makes everything look overexposed. I pulled up to a pump. Didn't need gas. Just needed to be somewhere with light and a reason to have stopped. I killed the engine and sat there and watched the exit ramp in my side mirror. The car took the exit. Pulled into the lot. It parked in the outer darkness of the lot, past the reach of the overhead lights, where the pavement met the scrubland. Not at a pump. Not near the entrance. In the dark edge where you park if you don't want to be seen clearly. And the engine kept running. I could see the faint shimmer of exhaust in the warm air, but the headlights went off. Just sitting there. In the dark. Engine running. No one getting out. I had 911 half-dialed on my phone for 20 minutes. My thumb over the call button. Watching that dark shape in the outer lot in my mirror. Nothing moved. No door opened. No light came on inside the car. Just a dark sedan idling at the edge of the light while I sat at a pump I didn't need with a phone I wasn't sure I should use. Here's what stopped me from calling, and I've thought about whether that was the right call ever since. I had nothing. I had a car that had driven behind me at the same distance for 90 miles, and now a car parked in a gas station lot at the same time I was in a gas station lot. I could hear how it would sound on a dispatch call. I could hear the pause on the other end. Tired nurse? Late shift. Empty highway. After 20 minutes, I got back on I-10. I drove the last 15 miles to our house watching my mirror the whole way. The car did not follow. I got home at 3:40. My husband was up. He always waits up when I work nights, that's just who he is. And I came through the door and I could tell from his face that I looked the way I felt. I sat down at the kitchen table and I told him everything. The lights. The distance maintained. The exit. The parking lot. The 20 minutes. When I described the car. Dark-colored. Sedan. Newer model. High LED headlights. No front license plate visible. He sat down across from me and his face did something I didn't understand for a second. He said, 2 weeks ago. When you were on that long run of nights and I had the house by myself. I looked at him. He said he'd woken up at around 3 a.m. one night. He didn't remember exactly which night, but it was during that stretch when I was working 4 nights back to back. Something had pulled him out of sleep. He'd gone to the front window. There was a car parked on the street directly in front of our house. He'd stood at the window and watched it. It sat there for close to 40 minutes. No one got out. Engine running the whole time. Then it left. He described the car. Dork sedan. Newer. High-mounted LED headlights. No front plate. We reported it. A police report, a description, the approximate dates. Nothing came of it. No one was identified. The officer who took the report was professional and kind and gave us absolutely nothing to work with. We installed cameras. We moved 6 months later. We'd been thinking about it for other reasons, and that made the decision for us. I still think about the 20 minutes in that gas station lot. Because whoever was in that car had me completely alone. 3 a.m., off-ramp in the middle of the desert, no one around, for 20 full minutes. And they did nothing. They just sat in the dark at the edge of the light and watched me decide whether to call for help. What I can't get out of my head is this, and I've never said this out loud to anyone, not even my husband. What if the following on the highway wasn't the point? What if the 20 minutes in the lot wasn't the point either? What if the point was just to let me know they knew which direction I drove home from work? Which exit I'd use when I was scared? What time I came through the front door? What if everything that happened that night was just someone showing me they'd already done their homework? And the car outside our house was proof. Felix threw away an entire roll of undeveloped film. If you don't know anything else about Felix, that sentence means nothing. But if you knew him the way I knew him, if you'd spent 2 years watching this man pull over on highways to photograph telephone poles in interesting light, if you'd sat with him in a darkroom at midnight while he held a developing print under a red lamp like it was something sacred, if you understood that film photography was not a hobby for him but genuinely the closest thing he had to a religion, then you understand that sentence the way I understood it when he told me. Something happened to Felix inside that smelter. Something during those 9 minutes when he disappeared from a room with no exits. And whatever it was bad enough that he didn't want a single image from that day to exist in the world. I've been over it hundreds of times. I still don't have an answer, but I'll give you everything I have. We drove up from Tempe on a Saturday in October. 2 years ago, early in the month, that particular Arizona October weather where the summer has finally loosened its grip and the Verde Valley goes golden and the air smells like juniper and cooling rock. Felix and I had been doing urban exploration together for about 2 years at that point, and I want to be specific about what that means because the word gets associated with the wrong kind of thing. We weren't thrill seekers. We weren't trespassing into active sites and posting it for attention. We researched before we went anywhere. We understood the history of what we were walking into. Felix especially. He treated every site like it had something to say if you were patient enough to listen. The Clarkdale smelter was his idea. He'd been researching the United Verde Copper Company for months, the whole history of it, the Verde Valley mining era, the way the operation had shaped and scarred the land. The main smokestack is still standing near the old town site, this massive historic structure visible from the highway, and the surrounding complex is in various stages of decay. Felix had found records, floor plans, photographs from the operational era. He knew the layout before we arrived. He always knew the layout before we arrived. We got there around 9 in the morning. October light in the Verde Valley is genuinely something. That low angle, everything warm and specific, shadows long and clean. Felix was shooting film the way he always did, a camera he'd had for years that he treated better than most people treat their cars. I was shooting digital. We had headlamps, a first aid kit, 2 exit routes identified. Felix's standard preparation. The upper level of the main structure was interesting but not surprising: industrial decay, old equipment, the smell of rust and mineral residue that clings to copper processing sites the way a specific kind of memory clings to certain rooms. Copper smelting leaves a chemical presence that doesn't fully leave. The air inside tasted faintly metallic even decades later. Felix was working slowly and deliberately, the way he always did, composing each frame like it mattered, which to him it did. The lower level was accessed through a descending passage, wide, sloped, brick-lined, the kind of passage designed for moving material by cart rather than by hand. It went down maybe 20 feet and opened into a chamber that was larger than we expected. High ceiling for a below-grade space. The brick walls were intact, thick, the original construction from the early 20th century. Cold, noticeably colder than the upper level, the kind of cold that comes from mass, from all that brick and earth holding the night temperature and refusing to let the day in. I want to describe it carefully because the layout matters for what happened later. The chamber was roughly rectangular, maybe 60 feet long, 30 feet wide. One entrance, the sloped passage we'd come down. The walls were solid brick on 3 sides. On the far end, the east wall, there was a doorway that had been bricked over at some point. Filled in with newer brick than the surrounding wall, the mortar a slightly different color. Old enough to be well settled, but clearly a later addition to the original structure. I tested it when I got close, pressed on several bricks, put my weight against it. Solid. Every brick in place. No give, no movement, no hollow sound. No other openings. No side passages. No floor hatches. I'm telling you this because I spent 30 minutes in that room and I looked at every surface. There was nowhere to go except back up the passage we'd come down. Felix was working the far end of the chamber, near the bricked doorway, setting up a long exposure. I'd moved toward the middle of the room to photograph a piece of equipment. I think it was a partial conveyor mechanism, corroded almost beyond recognition. I was focused on my shot. Felix was focused on his. I heard him make a sound. Not a yell, not a scream, just a short, cut-off sound, like the first syllable of a word that didn't get finished. The kind of sound a person makes when something stops them mid-breath. I lowered my camera and turned around. Felix was gone. I want to be precise here because I've been over this so many times that imprecision feels like dishonesty. The chamber was 60 feet long and 30 feet wide. I had a headlamp. Felix had a headlamp, and even if his had been off, mine would have shown him anywhere in that space. There were no shadows large enough to hide a person. There was no alcove, no depression in the floor, no place to step behind. The bricked doorway was solid. I had tested it myself 20 minutes before. The sloped passage back to the upper level was the only exit, and I was between Felix's position and that passage, and I had not heard him walk past me. I called his name. The brick walls gave it back to me flat and fast, the way sound moves in a sealed space. Nothing. I walked the full perimeter of the chamber with my headlamp on full. I pressed on the brick doorway again. Still solid, still cold, still not a millimeter of movement. I checked the floor for anything I might have missed. I went to the base of the sloped passage and called up it. Nothing came back. I stood in the middle of that room and I understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that there was nowhere Felix could be. The timestamp on the last photo I took before I noticed he was gone is 11:23 a.m. The timestamp on the first photo I took after he came back is 11:32. 9 minutes. I have checked this so many times the numbers feel like something burned in. He came back through the sloped passage. Just appeared at the bottom of it, walking normally, headlamp on. I asked him where he'd been before he'd even fully stepped into the chamber. I asked it the way you ask something when your whole body is still running on the adrenaline of a thing that shouldn't have happened. He said he'd gone up to check the light. I told him I'd called up the passage and he hadn't answered. He said he probably hadn't heard me. And then this is the part that told me something was seriously wrong. More than the 9 minutes, more than the impossible geometry of his disappearance. Felix, who narrated everything, who processed his entire experience of the world out loud, who had a running commentary for every site we'd ever explored together, went completely quiet. Not thoughtful quiet. Not tired quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from a person who has made a decision not to speak because speaking would require saying something they are not going to say. We drove back to Tempe mostly in silence. He was present enough. He answered direct questions. He wasn't catatonic. He just wasn't there in the way Felix was always there. The particular aliveness of him was turned down to something I didn't recognize. He sold all his equipment the following week. Both cameras, every lens, his developing trays, his enlarger, the specific thermometer he used for developer temperature that he'd owned for 6 years and treated like a precision instrument because it was all of it on Facebook Marketplace, gone in 2 days. I texted him about it and he said he was done with it and moving on. I asked about the role he'd had in his camera at Clarkdale. whether he'd developed it. He said he'd thrown the roll away undeveloped. I have known Felix for 6 years. He had a box in his closet with every roll he'd ever shot going back to when he was 19 years old. He did not throw away undeveloped film. It was not a thing he did. It was not a thing he was capable of doing. It would have been easier for me to believe he'd thrown away a piece of himself. I left it alone for almost a year. We stayed friends, we just didn't talk about Clarkdale, and I learned the shape of that silence and worked around it. Then last spring I asked him once more. Directly, clearly, one time. I told him I wasn't asking to push him or scare him. I told him I just needed to know if the thing I was carrying around from that day was real or if I'd built it into something it wasn't. He looked at me for a long moment. And then he said, "There was a door." I told him what I knew. I told him I had tested the brick doorway myself and it was solid. I told him I had checked every wall. He nodded like I'd confirmed something. He said, "I know. That's why I threw the film away." Then he looked back down at whatever he'd been doing and that was the end of it. He has never mentioned Clarkdale again. I have never asked again. I still have the photos I took that day. I've looked at them more times than I can count. The chamber walls, the equipment, the brick doorway. In one of them, taken about 4 minutes before my 11:23 timestamp, you can see the edge of Felix's headlamp beam in the far corner near the east wall. He's there. He's working. Everything is normal. For minutes later, he was nowhere in a room with no exits. 9 minutes after that, he came back through the only door. I don't know what he found. I don't know what was on that film. I don't know what door he's talking about when he talks about a door I tested with my own hands and found solid. What I know is that Felix was the most careful person I have ever explored with. The one who always had 2 exits planned. The one who never, not once, did anything without understanding exactly what he was walking into. And whatever he walked into in that chamber, he came back from it and immediately started making sure no evidence existed that he'd ever been there. That's not a person who found nothing. That's a person who found something and decided the safest thing he could do was make sure the world never saw it. The water bottle had my name on it. Not printed. Not typed. Handwritten in my handwriting. The specific way I make the capital letter at the start of my name. The slight leftward lean I've had since middle school that no handwriting teacher ever fully corrected. My letters. My hand. On a water bottle inside a crawlspace behind my water heater that someone had sealed with fresh paint and that I had lived above for 6 weeks without knowing existed. That's the moment everything reorganized itself. Every small thing I'd been explaining away for a month and a half, the food, the hairbrush, the smell. It all clicked into place at once, the way a dislocated joint feels when it finally goes back in. Except the opposite of relief. The complete opposite of relief. I moved to Tucson in August, right after the divorce was finalized. I want to say that clearly because the timing matters. I was not in the most stable emotional place, and I was aware of that, and I kept it in mind every time something felt off in that house. I told myself repeatedly that I was hypervigilant, that I was a recently divorced woman living alone for the first time in 9 years, that my nervous system was going to find threats in empty rooms for a while, and that was normal, and I needed to give myself time. That self-awareness, that perfectly reasonable psychological explanation, is what kept me in that house 6 weeks longer than I should have been. The house was in the Barrio Hollywood neighborhood, one of the older parts of Tucson, original adobe construction, single-story, thick walls that held the cool air even in August heat. A small walled courtyard in the back with a fig tree and terracotta pots. Original tile floors the color of rust and cream. I loved it the moment my friend showed it to me. It felt like a place that had absorbed decades of living and had room for more. It felt like exactly the kind of place where you could put something down and start over. I moved in on a Wednesday. I was alone, which was entirely the point. The first 2 weeks were good. Getting settled, learning the neighborhood, figuring out which windows caught the evening breeze and which ones to keep shut against the afternoon heat. I was working remotely, so I was home most of the day, which I liked. The house felt solid. The walls were thick enough that the street noise disappeared. I cooked dinner with the courtyard door open and listened to the neighborhood wind down at night. The first thing I noticed was the food. Not dramatically, just a vague sense that things were going faster than they should. A sleeve of crackers that felt lighter than I expected. An apple one was certain I hadn't eaten. Half a protein bar on the counter that I had a clear memory of putting back in the cabinet hole. Small enough that every single instance had its own reasonable explanation. I ate it and forgot. I miscounted. I was stressed and eating without registering it. I adjusted how I shopped. Started keeping a loose mental inventory. Told myself I was being careful. The hairbrush started 2 weeks in. I have a specific brush I've had for years. The bristle pattern is distinctive. I'd recognize it anywhere. I keep it in the bathroom cabinet, second shelf, right side. One morning it was on the sink. I put it back. The next morning it was on the sink again. Then not for several days. Then again. I told myself I was doing it in my sleep. Stress does strange things to sleep. I'd been grinding my teeth since the separation. My dentist had mentioned it, and sleepwalking wasn't much of a stretch from there. I put the brush back every time and didn't let myself think about it too carefully. The smell was the third thing and the hardest to rationalize. Not a bad smell. Not rot or must or anything alarming. Just different. Someone else's presence. The way you can walk into a room and know another person was recently in it without seeing any evidence. Faint and only in the hallway near the bathroom and only some mornings and always gone by the time I'd had coffee and come back to check. I told myself it was the old adobe construction off-gassing something. I told myself it was a neighbor's scent drifting through a shared wall. I told myself a lot of things. 6 weeks in, the water heater made a clanking sound. Not alarming, old units do that, thermal expansion, sediment at the bottom of the tank. I went to look at it more out of habit than worry. The utility closet off the kitchen, barely wide enough to turn around in, just the water heater and the pipes and 2 walls of drywall and 2 walls of original adobe. I'd been in that closet once when I moved in to check the age of the unit. I hadn't looked carefully at anything beyond the heater itself. This time, because I was crouched down checking the connection at the base, I saw it. The baseboard along the back wall, behind where the heater sat, was different from the rest. Not dramatically, you'd never see it standing up. But crouched down, at floor level, with the utility light on, the paint was visibly newer. Brighter. Less settled into the surface. The rest of the closet had the particular flatness of paint that's been on a wall for decades. This section, maybe 2 feet wide, floor level, had the slight sheen of something applied within the last year. Maybe less. I pressed on it. It moved. Not swung open, just flexed slightly inward, the way a thin panel does when there's open space behind it rather than solid wall. Enough to know it wasn't backed by adobe. I should have stopped there. I should have called my landlord, called a friend, called anyone. I know that now with a certainty that sits in my chest like a stone. But I was alone in the house at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and the self-aware part of my brain was still running its script about hypervigilance and reasonable explanations, and I pressed harder and the panel came free. Behind it, low, maybe 18 inches high, 4 feet deep, the width of 2 people lying side by side, was a crawl space. I had my phone. I turned on the flashlight and put it through the opening. A folded blanket. Dark-colored, clean, recently used, the kind of clean that comes from washing, not from disuse. A plastic water bottle, the kind you refill, standing upright against the wall. And taped to the interior ceiling, with ordinary masking tape, a piece of paper. I pulled the paper out. It was a list. Formatted the way I format lists, categories grouped together, the grocery items in the order I move through a store, which is a habit so specific to me that I've never met anyone who does it the same way. The handwriting was mine. The capital letters, the leftward lean, the way I connect certain letters without lifting the pen. My handwriting. My list structure. Written by someone who had been watching me long enough to learn both. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking to the kitchen. I have no memory of the next several minutes. They simply aren't there. The next thing I can account for is sitting at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand and a 911 dispatcher already on the line, which means some part of me made all those decisions while the rest of me was somewhere else entirely. The police came. 2 officers, then a third. They took it seriously from the moment they looked in that crawl space. More seriously than I'd expected, which told me something about how bad it actually was. They found more than I'd seen. Additional food wrappers. Recent. A small folded piece of fabric I hadn't noticed. Evidence of sustained occupancy. Not a single visit, not a curious trespasser who'd stumbled on the space, but someone who had been using it regularly. for an extended period. My landlord came within an hour. He was genuinely horrified. I could see it, and I've been a reader of people long enough to know the difference between performed horror and real horror. He said the previous tenant had left 6 weeks before I moved in. The house had been empty for exactly the gap between her leaving and me arriving. 6 weeks. Which meant whoever had been in that crawlspace had found it or made it during those 6 empty weeks. Had learned the house when it was unoccupied. Had established themselves there. And then had stayed when I moved in and the house stopped being empty and started being mine. Here's what I haven't been able to stop thinking about. The thing that surfaces at 3 a.m. and won't go back under. The food that disappeared, the crackers, the apple, the protein bar, that wasn't someone breaking in at night. The house was locked. The windows were locked. I checked them, which means the access point was internal. Which means whoever was in that crawlspace had a way to move through the house while I was there. While I was working at my desk in the other room. While I was in the courtyard with the door open listening to the neighborhood. While I was asleep. 6 weeks of coexisting in 900 square feet. 6 weeks of them learning which shelf I kept the crackers on and how I made my capital letters. The police never identified who it was. No prints that led anywhere, no DNA match in any system, no suspect ever named. We changed the locks, pointless, since the access wasn't through a lock. My landlord sealed the crawlspace with concrete. I was gone within 2 weeks, back to a city where I knew people, where I had never felt watched from below my own floors. I still think about the water bottle most. Because the grocery list was disturbing, the handwriting, the structure, the evidence of long observation. But the grocery list could have been practice. Could have been a copy made from something found in the house. The water bottle had my name on it. You don't copy a name from a found document and practice writing it on a water bottle unless the water bottle is for you. Unless someone in that crawlspace, in the dark under my floors, was keeping a water bottle with my name on it for a reason I have never been able to make myself fully imagine. I've tried. I can't get there. Maybe that's the one mercy in all of it, that whatever they intended, whatever the name on the bottle meant to them, I found the panel before I found out. There is a voicemail on my phone from myself. Not a pocket dial. Not a glitch. Not a technical error that a patient person with a reasonable explanation could walk me through. A 4-minute and 17-second voicemail recorded at 3:14 in the morning on October 27th, in which I am clearly, audibly having a conversation, responding, pausing at the right intervals, laughing once in a way that sounds completely natural, and there is no one else on the call. Clean audio. No second voice. No background voice that got filtered or dropped. Just me, alone, talking to something that left no sound behind. I have been to 3 doctors since this happened. 2 general practitioners and a neurologist at the hospital where I work. All 3 found nothing. No seizure activity, no dissociative disorder meeting any formal diagnostic criteria. No evidence of any neurological event in my imaging or my blood work or my cognitive assessments. I have the paperwork in a folder in my desk drawer and I have looked at it so many times the edges are soft. I am a librarian. I have worked at the university in Flagstaff for 19 years. I catalog things. I maintain records. I am the kind of person who notices when a book has been reshelved incorrectly, and it bothers me until I fix it. My colleagues think this is both my greatest professional strength and my least attractive personal quality, and they are probably right on both counts. I am telling you this because I need you to understand the specific texture of the person this happened to. Not someone prone to drama. Not someone who misplaces weeks of their life. Not someone whose grip on ordinary reality has ever given anyone reason to worry. The week I cannot account for runs from October 23rd to October 30th, 2 years ago. I know the start date because of my calendar. I have a meeting logged for the morning of the 23rd that I have absolutely no memory of attending, though my notes from it are in my work folder, organized and coherent. I know the end date because of when I became aware again. Sitting in my car in a gas station parking lot on Route 66 near downtown Flagstaff at 11 in the morning, wearing my work clothes, my bag on the passenger seat, my coffee thermos in the cup holder still faintly warm. 7 days. Gone. I want to be precise about what gone means because it's not quite accurate to say the week is blank. Blank implies an empty space, a gap you can feel the edges of. This is more like, a box exists, you can see the outside of it, you can pick it up and feel the weight of something inside. But when you open it, there is nothing there. Occasional textures without content. Cold air. The smell of ponderosa pine and wood smoke. The particular quiet of Coconino National Forest when the wind drops and the trees just stand there holding whatever they know. These things surface sometimes, especially at night, and they feel like memory the way a dream feels like memory. Present and vivid and completely resistant to being held. The external record of that week is intact and consistent. My colleagues confirm I came to work every day. I answered emails, I have read them, they are articulate, they are in my voice, they handle several ongoing projects correctly and in the order I would have prioritized them. My neighbor saw me collect my mail on the 26th and I apparently waved at her, which is what I always do. My sister called on the 28th and we spoke for 22 minutes. Both our call logs confirm this, and she told me afterward that nothing seemed wrong. I sounded like myself. We talked about her daughter's school play and a book I'd recommended to her and whether our mother was going to come for Thanksgiving. None of it is in me. I have tried to access it the way you try to access a word that's on the tip of your tongue. Relaxing the effort, coming at it sideways, waiting. Nothing comes. The version of me that lived that week did so completely and competently and left no forwarding address inside my own mind. But here is what I have never fully said out loud until now. There is one gap in the external record. During that week, I apparently did not engage with personal calls or personal messages. Work communications were handled, emails answered, one staff meeting attended, reference questions resolved. But personal texts went unread. Personal calls went to voicemail. My husband called twice and got no answer. My sister's call on the 28th is the single exception, and she initiated it, which means something in me picked up for her and managed 22 minutes of normal conversation and then went back to wherever it had been. 34 missed personal notifications when I came back to myself in that parking lot. 34 people trying to reach me across 7 days and finding a version of me that was present enough to go to work but absent enough not to notice them. Except for one message. In my voicemail inbox, between two concerned messages from my husband, there was a recording I had made myself. My number calling my number. Timestamped 3:14 a.m. on October 27th. The fourth night of the week I don't remember. 4 minutes and 17 seconds long. The first time I played it I didn't understand what I was hearing. I recognized my voice immediately but the context was so wrong that my brain kept trying to reframe it. A note to myself, a reminder, an accidental recording of me talking in my sleep. Took 2 full listens before I understood what I was actually hearing. I was having a conversation, not leaving a message. A conversation, the specific rhythm of it, the back and forth, the pauses calibrated to a response that was coming from somewhere and being received. I speak, and there is a pause of exactly the length a reply would take, and I respond to whatever was said in that pause. 4 minutes and 17 seconds of this. And at 2 minutes and 40 seconds I laugh. Not politely, not nervously, but a real laugh, the laugh of someone genuinely amused by something someone they trust has just said. The audio is clean. I had it analyzed by a professor in the university's audio production department. Someone I trust and who owes me nothing in the way of being careful with my feelings. He listened 3 times and told me there is no second channel, no evidence of editing or layering, no filtered or removed audio, no technical artifact that would account for the pauses. The recording is exactly what it sounds like. One person, alone, at 3:14 in the morning, having a conversation with something that made no sound. I have transcribed my side of it. I have read that transcript so many times I have parts of it memorized. It is ordinary conversation, the kind you have with someone you've known long enough that you don't need to perform for them. There is a reference to something that happened that I find interesting, though I can't identify what. There is a moment where I seem to be disagreeing with something gently, the way you push back on a friend whose opinion you respect but don't share. There is nothing frightening in my words. There is nothing that sounds like distress or confusion or fear. I sound like the most settled version of myself I can imagine. And here is the thing that sits underneath all of it, the thing I have turned over and over for 2 years without being able to put it down. 3 doctors found nothing wrong with me. The week is gone, but my body came through it fine. No injuries, no weight loss, no sign of anything physical having happened to me. The version of me that operated during those 7 days did her job well and spoke to her sister on the phone and waved at the neighbor and apparently stayed up past 3 in the morning having a comfortable conversation with something I cannot account for. She was not suffering. Whatever that week was, whatever happened in the Coconino in late October 2 years ago, whatever I walked into or was walked into, whatever the conversation at 3:14 in the morning actually was, the version of me inside it was not afraid, was not confused, was settled in a way that I, sitting here now with all my memories intact and my folder of clean medical results, am honestly not sure I've ever been. That should comfort me. Every rational part of me knows it should read as comfort. Instead, it is the thing that makes it hardest to sleep, because it raises a question I cannot answer and cannot stop asking. If something took 7 days from me, if something pulled me out of my ordinary life and held me somewhere for a week and then returned me to a parking lot on Route 66 with warm coffee in the cup holder, why did it feel, from the inside, like relief? Why did the version of me inside that week sound, at 3:14 in the morning, like someone who had finally put something down that she'd been carrying too long? I still have the voicemail. I have thought about deleting it more times than I can count. I have picked up my phone with the specific intention of deleting it and then not done it. I'm not fully sure why. Maybe because it's the only evidence I have that something real happened. Maybe because the sound of my own voice in that recording, easy, present, unhurried, is a version of myself I find I want to keep close even if I can't explain it. Or maybe because I keep listening for something in the pauses, some trace of whatever was on the other end. Some frequency I haven't isolated yet, some texture in the silence between my words that would finally tell me what I was talking to at 3:14 in the morning in October, while my husband's calls went to voicemail and the ponderosa forest stood in the dark outside my window. I haven't found it yet. The pauses are just silence, but they are the most specific silence I have ever heard. The silence of something present, something that listened, something that, for 4 minutes and 17 seconds, made me laugh like I hadn't laughed in years. Whatever it was, it knew me, maybe better than I know myself. And that is either the most terrifying thing I have ever said out loud, or the closest thing to hope I have left in this story. I genuinely do not know which one. If any of these stories stayed with you, if something in them felt closer to your own life than you'd like, leave it in the comments. We read everything. Subscribe to Black Fears if you want to stay in this with us. The next 7 stories are already waiting. And if something has happened to you that you've never told anyone, tell us. We're listening.